My name is Christine Murdoch. I'm 67 years old, a retired piano teacher who still believes music can hold broken things together. That morning, I woke early, brushing a hand across the old keys one last time before leaving. The apartment smelled faintly of rose water, the same scent I used when I first carried my daughter in my arms. On the counter sat a mug of coffee, gone cold, and a single slice of toast, buttered thin. I didn't finish either. Hope can fill a stomach more than breakfast ever could. I'd spent months saving for her gift, a fine china set, white with silver rims. Each piece had been paid off little by little, a promise in porcelain. The wedding invitation rested beside it, edges softened from handling. Today, I told myself, maybe we'd find our way back. Before leaving, I fastened my pearl earrings and slipped into the burgundy dress I'd ironed the night before. The color reminded me of red wine, warm, forgiving, but deep enough to hide what it held. My shoes, nude and modest, clicked softly on the floor as I walked to the small wooden box on the dresser. Inside was the empty ring slot where my wedding band once lay. I had sold it quietly, enough to cover the final payment on the china. Some goodbyes happen in silence. The phone rang just as I picked up the wrapped package. Nora's voice crackled through. "Chris, remember what I said. Don't expect too much, okay? Just be there." "I know," I whispered. "It's her day, not mine." "Still, you deserve kindness." Her words lingered after the call ended. I touched my wrist, where a faint line of pale skin still marked the years of wearing that ring. The church was alive with lilies and golden light. Guests drifted in clusters, laughter mixing with the organ's hum. A young planner flipped through her list, brow tightening. "Mrs. Murdoch?" "Yes, here. Row 5. "Row 5? I glanced toward the front rows, already filled with familiar faces from another world. Vivian Langley, the groom's mother, draped in pearls that gleamed like approval. The planner smiled, polite but firm. "5th row, please." I nodded, clutching my small purse. "Of course." The steps down the aisle felt longer than years. Still, I smiled, because mothers are supposed to. When the ceremony ended, everyone flowed toward the reception hall. Golden light pooled across polished floors. Waiters moved briskly, balancing trays of champagne. I followed the table cards until I found mine. Table 8, tucked near the swinging kitchen door. The air carried a faint draft each time a server pushed through. Plates arrived lukewarm, chicken fading to gray, vegetables tired from waiting. Around me, polite strangers discussed travel and renovations, never looking twice at the woman who'd sold her ring to be here. Across the room, Lara laughed beside Vivian. My daughter's hair caught the light the way it used to when she was a child running through the yard. Around her neck hung my mother's pearls, the ones I once promised she'd wear on her wedding day. She hadn't mentioned borrowing them. I lifted my glass, half full of sour wine, and whispered, "They suit you." The words disappeared under the hum of conversation. A spoon tapped against crystal. The hall quieted. Lara rose, holding her glass high. Her smile was poised, rehearsed. "To the people who make us who we are," she began. "To those who stood by us, who believed in our dreams. My real family are those who make me happy." Applause erupted, sharp as breaking glass. For a heartbeat, I clapped too, before realizing she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes swept the crowd, then landed, steady and cold. "You can leave." The room froze. Someone coughed. A waiter hesitated mid-step. I felt every face turn toward me, their silence heavier than words. I set my napkin down beside the untouched bread roll and stood, careful not to tremble. Maybe I was the only one still hoping. The chair scraped softly against the floor, and then another sound, the deep slide of wood from the table ahead. As I straightened, Another figure rose beside me. Walter Langley, the groom's father, his gaze fixed not on his son, but on my daughter. The light caught the edge of his glasses, and for a moment no one breathed. As I stood, another chair scraped beside mine. 4 days before the wedding, I sat at the kitchen table with a small calculator and a stack of bills. The morning sun slanted across the linoleum, catching the chipped edges of the counter I'd meant to fix years ago. I pressed the buttons slowly, adding and re-adding, hoping the numbers would change if I willed them kindly enough. They didn't. The final payment for the china set was due. I looked toward the living room where my piano waited, half covered by a quilt to keep the dust away. Its ivory keys had faded to a soft yellow, like old photographs. I'd taught hundreds of children on that bench, guiding their small fingers toward songs they would forget. It wasn't just wood and wire. It was a witness of birthdays, late-night worries, letters from my husband before he passed. A knock came at the door. Mr. Halpern, the collector, stood holding a folded contract. "You sure about this, Mrs. Murdoch? It's a fine instrument." I nodded, voice steady. "She's ready for a new home." He counted the bills carefully, then paused, studying my face. "You're selling it for something important?" "For someone," I said. "My daughter's getting married." After he left, I sat on the empty bench. The silence felt heavier than any melody I'd ever played. Still, I told myself it was worth it. Love was measured in what we give away, not what we keep. I wrapped the china set later that evening, each plate cushioned in soft tissue. The lid closed with a soft click, a promise sealed inside cardboard. Beside it, I placed the tiny card I'd written in looping cursive. "May your table always be full, and your heart even fuller. Love, Mom." The next morning, I laid out the burgundy dress on the bed, smoothing the fabric like a prayer. Beside it sat the pearl earrings, polished until they caught the dawn light, and the nude heels I'd bought decades ago for another celebration that never came. As I packed the gift into a paper bag, the phone rang again. Nora's voice arrived, bright but cautious. "Morning, Chris. Big day's coming, huh?" "It is," I answered, slipping my coat on. "You sure about going? You said she barely returned your messages. She's my daughter. If there's a door, I'll knock on it." "She can be cold," Nora warned softly. I smiled into the silence. So was winter. Still, flowers bloom after. After the call ended, I touched the small bottle of rose perfume on the shelf, the same one I'd worn to Lara's piano recital when she was 10. The scent bloomed in the air, gentle, hopeful, remembering. I dabbed it at my wrist, then looked once more at the bare space where my piano had stood. "I'll play again someday," I murmured, though I wasn't sure if I meant music or forgiveness. Then I turned off the light, lifted the gift, and stepped into the hallway. Outside, the morning was pale and quiet, the sky brushed in soft gold. As I locked the door behind me, I thought, maybe today we'd find our way back. The church stood on a hill, wrapped in white ribbons and early sunlight. Bells rang softly overhead, mingling with laughter that drifted from the entrance. I paused on the stone steps, holding the neatly wrapped gift in both hands. The scent of lilies rolled toward me, sweet but heavy. Inside, the air buzzed with chatter and perfume, the kind that made you wonder if anyone could hear their own heart. A young woman with a clipboard hurried over, her headset flashing under the stained glass glow. "Name, please." "Christine Murdoch," I said, offering a gentle smile. She flipped through her list, pen tapping lightly. "Murdoch. Yes, here. You're seated in the 5th row." "Row 5?" I echoed, eyes flicking toward the front where the family sat. Vivian Langley's pearls shimmered beneath the golden aisle light, her posture straight, serene. Beside her, Lara leaned close, whispering something that drew a small, polished laugh. "Yes, ma'am," the planner confirmed, already scanning for her next name. I nodded, clutching the gift a little tighter. "Thank you." The pew creaked as I slipped into it. From here, the altar looked distant, blurred by silhouettes of tailored suits and sequined dresses. I smoothed the skirt of my burgundy dress, reminding myself that love doesn't measure distance by rows. Still, a quiet ache pressed at my ribs. Families didn't come with assigned seating when Lara was small. Back then, we shared benches at the park, splitting sandwiches and secrets about the shapes of clouds. A young couple beside me exchanged glances, lowering their voices. I caught a few words, "Mother" and "Row 5," before they turned away. I stared down at the china box resting against my knee. The silver bow glimmered faintly, as if trying to hold my attention. Music swelled from the organ, and everyone rose. I did too, careful not to let my heels scrape the floor. Then she appeared. My daughter. Lara floated down the aisle in a gown that shimmered like moonlight, every step composed, deliberate. Erin waited at the altar, eyes soft, face unreadable. When she passed my row, I smiled, small and certain, hoping it would catch her eye. For a moment, her gaze brushed mine. No warmth, just polite recognition, the kind given to a distant acquaintance. Then she looked ahead again, toward the promise waiting under arched beams. I lowered myself back onto the pew, heart quiet but not still. Around me, whispers folded into the hush of vows. I thought of the piano I had sold, of the notes that once filled our home like morning light. I had given her melody. She had given me silence. When the ceremony ended, applause scattered through the nave. Guests leaned in, exchanging congratulations. I joined softly, palms meeting like wings. "She's happy," I whispered to myself, though the words trembled as they left. Outside, as sunlight spilled across the steps, I stayed a moment longer, watching the newlyweds greet guests with practiced grace. Someone pressed a small program into my hand. On the back, in looping script, it read, "Reception immediately following, Langley Estate, ballroom entrance." Fifth row or not, I told myself, I would still go. Because sometimes love means showing up, even when you're placed in the back. The Langley ballroom shimmered under chandeliers that dripped light like champagne. Laughter drifted through the air, mingling with the faint clink of crystal. I followed the stream of guests inside, keeping my hands steady around the gift box. Every corner gleamed, polished floors reflecting shoes that had never known scuffs or scratches. A line formed at the seating chart near the entrance. I traced my name down the elegant list until it appeared. Christine Murdoch, Table 8. The numbers curved in gold ink, as if beauty could soften what it meant. I scanned the room. Table 8 sat near the swinging kitchen door, tucked behind a pillar where the air cooled each time a waiter pushed through. The distant laughter from the main tables reached me thin, like music through a wall. I placed the wrapped china set beside my chair, smoothing the tissue bow one more time before sitting. Around me, polite strangers arranged napkins on their laps and discussed new golf courses, art auctions, stocks that were promising this quarter. One of them smiled vaguely in my direction. "Friend of the family?" "Mother of the bride," I answered. His eyebrows lifted for half a second, then lowered behind a sip of wine. "Lovely ceremony." "Yes," I said softly, though I wasn't sure he heard. A server set down plates of chicken, steam already fading, skin pale from waiting too long. My fork tapped against porcelain, the sound small and lonely. At the center tables, waiters poured fresh glasses, bottles tilted in synchronized grace. Here at the edge, our glasses stayed half empty. Across the room, I caught sight of Laura. She moved through clusters of guests like sunlight through glass, smiling, leaning in, her hand resting easily on Vivian's arm. The older woman's pearls glowed against navy silk. My breath caught when I noticed the necklace at Laura's throat. My mother's pearls, heirloom of our family, gleaming against her skin. She hadn't asked. She hadn't needed to. I'd once promised they'd be hers on this day. I waited for her eyes to find me, for even a nod of acknowledgement. None came. Vivian whispered something. Laura laughed, tilting her head just enough for the pearls to catch the chandelier's glow. The light bounced once, bright and sharp, before fading across the room. At my table, conversation shifted to real estate. A woman with diamond bangles gestured toward her phone, showing photos of a new vacation home. Santa Barbara sunsets, you know? Just magical. I nodded politely, though the closest I'd been to the ocean lately was the picture pinned on my fridge. I reached for my glass. The wine was tepid, a hint of bitterness on the tongue. I thought of the coffee I'd left cold on my kitchen counter, of the piano-shaped void in my living room, of how warmth seemed to slip away faster these days. A burst of laughter rose from the head table. I looked up. Laura leaned against Aaron's shoulder, radiant, surrounded by people who mirrored her joy. I pressed my napkin against my lap, folding it once, then again. I reminded myself why I was here, not for the seating, not for the notice, but because love, even uninvited, shows up anyway. The lights dimmed slightly as waiters began clearing plates. Someone tapped a glass near the front, a bright, ringing note that called for attention. I glanced toward the sound, unaware that the next few minutes would carve themselves into memory. For now, I lifted my chin, forced a small smile, and whispered to the china box resting by my feet. "She'll open you soon." The gift stayed silent, gleaming softly in the shadows of table 8. A hush rippled through the ballroom as a spoon chimed gently against glass. The sound drew every gaze toward the head table where Laura stood, her gown shimmering under the chandelier. The microphone waited in her hand, silver catching the gold light. I straightened a little in my chair at table 8, folding my napkin carefully, the way I used to fold her recital programs before every performance. She smiled, a graceful, polished smile, and lifted her glass. "I just want to thank everyone who's here today. It means the world to celebrate with the people who have shaped us." Her eyes swept the room, warm and practiced. "You've all been such an important part of our journey." Applause scattered softly, like rain on a roof. I felt my chest swell, expecting a moment, a word, maybe a glance that would bridge the space between us. She continued, her voice smooth as crystal. "My real family are those who make me happy." Laughter burst from somewhere near the front, glasses raised, clinking cheerfully. The words landed sharp, slicing through the air before they settled heavy in my chest. My real family. I pressed my fingers against the edge of the table, trying to steady the tremor. She paused, her smile unwavering. Then, turning, she met my gaze across the room. Her eyes were calm, clear, unflinching. "You can leave." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The room seemed to tilt, music shrinking into silence. A waiter froze mid-step, tray hovering in midair. Someone shifted in their seat, glass scraping faintly against linen. The air pressed against my skin, thick and unmoving. I could feel every pair of eyes turn toward me, their sympathy quiet but piercing. I looked down at my hands resting on the table, one still holding the napkin, the other hovering above the untouched glass of dull red wine. My throat tightened. I reached for the small gift beside me, the china wrapped with months of sacrifice, and lifted it slowly from the floor. Its weight grounded me, even as my heart stumbled. I rose carefully, my chair whispering against the wood. The sound echoed louder than it should have. I wanted to speak, to say I'm proud of you or I understand. Anything that would keep the love alive between us. But words tangled behind my teeth. I caught sight of the pearls at her neck, the ones that once belonged to my mother. They gleamed softly, untarnished by the moment. Around me, guests murmured, some shifting uncomfortably, others watching with curious stillness. The music had stopped entirely. My breath came shallow, but my spine stayed straight. I thought of the mornings spent guiding her small hands across piano keys, of lullabies hummed in the dark when thunder rattled her window. I thought of how love doesn't vanish. It simply learns silence. I nodded once, more to myself than to anyone else. Maybe I was the only one still hoping. My chair pushed back fully now, the scrape long and slow, filling the space she'd emptied with her words. I gathered my purse, resting the gift gently against my hip. The chandelier's light trembled across the floor, spilling over the path toward the exit. As I turned, the hall stayed silent, suspended in the echo of her voice. The world had narrowed to footsteps and the soft rustle of my dress. Every heartbeat counted itself against the hush, steady and unbroken. And just as I took the first step, somewhere near the head table, another sound joined mine, a chair moving, firm and deliberate. The sound of my chair sliding back lingered in the air like a held breath. I lifted the gift box, steadying it against my chest, and turned toward the aisle between the tables. The parquet floor shimmered under the chandelier's light, every reflection a memory I didn't want to see. I could feel hundreds of eyes following, though no one spoke. Even the band waited, instruments in hand, their notes caught somewhere between sympathy and disbelief. My heels clicked softly, one after the other, each step measured, practiced, almost graceful, like leaving a stage you never asked to walk on. Halfway to the door, I caught my reflection in a wall mirror, burgundy fabric flowing behind me, pearls glinting at my ears. A woman who had given everything she owned for love and still wasn't enough. I adjusted the strap of my purse, lifted my chin, and whispered under my breath, "Don't cry. Not here." The silence broke when a deep voice, calm but firm, cut through the room. "Not yet." The word echoed, steady, unmistakable. A second chair scraped against the wood, slow and deliberate. I turned slightly. Walter Langley, the groom's father, was standing at the head table. The light caught on the rim of his glasses as he rose to full height, his hand resting lightly on the back of his chair. His gaze moved from his son to my daughter, then found me. "Before she leaves," he said, voice low but carrying, "there's something I need to say." The crowd shifted, whispers rippling like wind through tall grass. I froze mid-step, caught between shame and confusion. Walter's eyes stayed steady, not accusing, not pitying, just sure, like someone who'd seen truth quietly unfold long before the rest of the room. Lara's lips parted. "Mr. Langley?" He lifted a hand, gentle but firm. "In a moment." Aaron looked from his father to me, uncertainty flickering across his face. Vivian reached for her wineglass, then stopped, fingers tightening around the stem. I clutched the box tighter. The china inside clinked faintly, a fragile heartbeat in my hands. My pulse matched it, fragile but alive. From the back of the room, someone coughed softly. No one else moved. The chandeliers hummed with quiet electricity, and the air felt charged, trembling on the edge of something I couldn't name. Walter took a single step forward, the polished floor reflecting his shoes. His expression was calm, but his shoulders squared like a man carrying a decision long kept. Let's not mistake kindness for weakness, he said quietly, more to the room than to anyone in particular. I lowered my gaze, not out of shame, but in disbelief. Someone had spoken into the silence, breaking the weight that had settled over me. My breath caught, a tremor threading through my fingers. The golden light spilled between us, stretching across the space where isolation had stood moments earlier. For the first time that evening, I wasn't the only one standing. As I stood, another chair scraped beside mine, and the sound rang clear as truth. Walter adjusted his jacket, the crisp fabric catching the light, and looked across the hall toward me. "Before we raise another glass," he said, "there's something that needs to be heard." His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of certainty, the kind that made even whispers go still. He stepped out from behind the table, each movement deliberate, measured. The crowd parted without being asked. I stayed frozen near the aisle, clutching the gift box, unsure whether to sit or keep standing. My daughter's eyes flickered nervously, confusion clouding her poise. Walter paused, gaze sweeping the room. "I've watched many weddings," he began, "but I've also lived long enough to know that celebration means little without truth." He glanced toward Lara, then toward me. In the weeks leading up to today, I heard things I couldn't ignore. Words spoken about a mother, about where she belongs, what she deserves. Lara stiffened. "Mr. Langley, this isn't—" He lifted a hand gently. "Please, you'll have your time." His voice softened, but the steadiness remained. I didn't want to assume, so I did what any father should do before welcoming someone new into his family. I listened, and I looked. He turned slightly, addressing the guests. "You see, I was raised by a woman who had nothing but gave everything. She taught me that the measure of a person isn't in their wealth, but in their gratitude." The room stayed silent, the chandeliers reflecting fragments of gold across the polished floor. Walter drew a small folded paper from his jacket pocket, holding it lightly between his fingers. "I met with someone who could tell me the truth. Her sister, Nora." His eyes sought mine for a moment, offering a quiet nod. "She told me about late nights, extra jobs, and a piano sold to cover a medical bill. About sacrifices made in silence so a daughter could stand here today." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt my throat tighten, my grip on the gift trembling. The memory of ivory keys under my hands flickered behind my eyes. The music, the lessons, the goodbye I'd whispered when the piano left my home. Walter's gaze moved to Lara. I wanted to see for myself who she was now. So last night, at the rehearsal dinner, I asked one of the servers to bring the wrong drink. A small test, nothing cruel. Just a chance to see grace in action. He paused. "Some people say loyalty is what you do when everyone's watching. I believe it's what you do when no one thinks you're looking." Lara's face paled. A murmur swept through the guests. I caught Aaron's hand shifting on the table, his jaw tightening as though he'd just understood. Walter continued, his voice calm. "What I saw told me everything I needed to know. Kindness can't be worn like jewelry. Gratitude can't be performed." He turned fully toward me now, his expression steady, almost gentle. "No mother who gives her life for her child should be asked to leave her child's joy. Not ever." The chandeliers flickered softly as his words settled into the silence. I felt the air return to my lungs, slow and fragile. Across the room, Lara's hands trembled at her sides. Walter placed the folded paper on the head table, then looked once more toward the crowd. "This isn't about shame," he said. "It's about remembering what built the foundation beneath these vows. A home, a heart, a woman who gave more than she ever kept. My eyes burned, but I held them steady. The room, moments ago cold and distant, now felt closer, as if something unseen had shifted toward Grace. And for the first time that evening, the silence didn't hurt. It listened. Walter rested a steady hand on the back of his chair. "There are moments," he said, "when words aren't enough. Tonight should be about truth, not appearances." He nodded toward the staff at the edge of the ballroom. A young attendant stepped forward, carrying a small folder wrapped in navy leather. "This," Walter continued, opening it, "is what love looks like when no one is watching." He lifted a page gently, the paper trembling faintly under the chandelier's glow. "These are receipts, proof of devotion that expected nothing in return." He held up the first sheet so the nearby guests could see. Years ago, when Lara's tuition was overdue and she was on the verge of losing her scholarship, someone made a payment in full. No one knew the name behind it, but here it is: Christine Murdoch. A ripple passed through the tables, quiet as wind through curtains. My chest tightened. I remembered that day, the letter from the college, the long walk to the registrar's office, the check that emptied what little I had. Walter turned another page. When Lara was hospitalized after her appendix burst, the insurance barely covered half. Someone stayed by her bed every night, then sold their wedding ring to pay the rest. Here's the record of that sale. He set the slip beside the first, his voice calm, unwavering. And most recently, just last week, another sacrifice. A piano sold, a teacher's life work, so she could bring a gift to this celebration. Here's the bill of sale. The hall grew still. Even the clink of glasses ceased. I lowered my eyes, remembering the hollow space in my living room, the silence where music once lived. Walter stepped closer to Lara, his expression not harsh, only solemn. "Love doesn't need witnesses, but tonight, it deserves them." Lara's breath caught, her painted smile faltering. Erin reached for her hand, but she pulled it away, eyes wide, fixed on the documents before her. Vivian stirred in her seat, pearls shifting against silk. "Walter," she whispered, "perhaps this isn't the—" He shook his head gently. "It is." He turned to the audience. "Before tonight, my wife and I plan to give these newlyweds a small down payment on their first home. A gesture of blessing, of hope. But a house built on disregard crumbles faster than one built on sand." He paused, letting the words settle. "So we'll redirect that gift, not in anger, but in honor, to something that values what truly matters." I stood motionless near the aisle, every sound muted except the quiet rhythm of my heartbeat. I hadn't asked for this defense, this unveiling, yet it unfolded like a hymn sung by a stranger who somehow knew every word. Walter looked toward me, his eyes soft. "Mrs. Murdoch, you gave beyond measure. Tonight, the world should see what real family means." Gasps scattered through the crowd, some guests bowing their heads, others watching Lara with a mixture of pity and shock. My daughter's shoulders sagged under the weight of truths she could no longer outrun. The lights from the chandelier shimmered across the polished floor, bending through the tears I refused to let fall. I lifted my chin slightly, the gift box still pressed against my heart, and thought of every night spent believing that love, even unseen, would one day be recognized. Across the hall, Lara's glass tilted in her hand, wine trembling near the rim. For the first time that evening, she looked at me. Not through me, not past me, but at me. And the silence that followed wasn't cold. It was awakening. For a moment, no one moved. The ballroom hung in a fragile stillness, as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Lara's hand shook, the wine in her glass rippling, catching shards of gold light. Her face had gone pale beneath the soft layers of makeup. Across the room, whispers swelled and faded again like a tide, uncertain and uneasy. Aaron rose slowly from his chair. The scrape of wood against the floor echoed through the hall. His eyes met his father's, then drifted to me. Something in his expression shifted. An understanding, maybe sorrow. Finally, he turned to the woman beside him, the bride who stood frozen in a gown heavy with satin and silence. "Lara," he said quietly, "is it true?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Only the faint rattle of the papers still lying on the table, the receipts of love, trembling where they'd been set down. She looked from Aaron to Walter, then to me, as if each face carried a reflection she couldn't bear to see. Aaron took a slow breath. "I thought we were building a life on honesty, on respect." He reached for her hand, but this time it was to release, not to hold. "I can't start a marriage like this." The room stirred. Vivian gasped softly, her pearls shifting against her collarbone. "Aaron, don't! This isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," he said, voice steady. "Because if love isn't real here, it won't be real anywhere." He slipped the ring from his finger, the small circle gleaming once beneath the light, then placed it gently on the table, beside the folded papers. The sound was soft, but it carried through every corner. Lara's shoulders shook. "Aaron, please, I can explain." He shook his head, not in anger, but in quiet grief. "You shouldn't have to explain kindness. It should speak for itself." A murmur spread through the guests, a low hum of disbelief and sympathy. Some looked down, others glanced toward me with eyes that had softened since the start of the evening. I stood near the aisle, the gift box still in my hands, unsure whether to stay or to fade into the doorway. My heart ached not in victory, but in sorrow for the years that had led us here. Love didn't feel triumphant. It felt tired. Lara turned toward me, tears streaking through her mascara. "Mom, I didn't mean—" Her voice broke. "Please don't go." I looked at her, my daughter, the little girl who once clung to my apron strings, who once fell asleep to lullabies from the same piano she'd asked me to forget. There was no anger in me now, only a quiet ache for all the words we'd both left unsaid. I stepped closer, close enough to see the tremble in her chin. "Some lessons," I whispered, "can't be learned until everything else is gone." The music never returned. The applause never came. Only the steady hum of lights and the soft rustle of fabric as I turned toward the door. I didn't rush. Grief doesn't hurry. Each step echoed faintly, a rhythm of endings and beginnings. Behind me, chairs shifted, voices murmured, but I didn't look back. Outside the hall, the night waited cool and wide. I paused at the threshold, letting the air brush against my face, carrying the faint scent of lilies from the church. I had come to celebrate love. I was leaving to remember it. The next morning, sunlight slid across the curtains like a soft apology. My dress hung on the back of a chair, still creased from the night before, faint traces of perfume and humiliation clinging to the fabric. On the kitchen table, the coffee I'd poured before the wedding had turned to cold silence, untouched since dawn yesterday. I sat in the same chair where I'd balanced my calculator days earlier, hands wrapped around a mug that had long stopped steaming. The house felt different now, emptier, but also lighter, like the air after a storm. The gift box rested on the counter, unopened, a quiet monument to all the things I still wished had gone right. The phone rang. I hesitated before picking it up. "Chris?" It was Nora. Her voice, warm and steady, filled the room like sunlight returning to a shuttered space. "I saw the video someone posted. You don't owe that room your shame. You were the only one who stood with grace." I breathed out slowly, pressing my thumb against the ceramic. I just wanted her to be happy. "You've done more than enough," Nora said gently. "She'll see that one day. Maybe not soon, but someday." "I'm not sure I'll be here when she does." "You will," she answered. "And when she comes back, let it be on truth, not guilt." After we hung up, the quiet returned, softer this time. I turned my gaze toward the spot where the piano had once stood. In its place sat an envelope, pale and slightly worn, leaning against a vase of wilted carnations. Someone had slipped it through the mail slot. No return address, just my name written in a familiar hand. I recognized the looping script instantly. Thomas. My late husband's handwriting, precise and tender, the way he used to sign the notes he left beside my morning tea. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, a single page. "If Laura forgets, remind her who made her. And when you remind her, remember who you can still be." I read it twice, tracing each curve of ink as if it could steady me. He must have written it years ago, back when the world still felt whole, when our daughter was young enough to sit on his knee and believe kindness was endless. Outside the window, the small garden we'd planted together shimmered with dew. The hydrangeas drooped, blue petals curling like folded hands. I pushed open the door and stepped out barefoot, letting the grass cool my feet. The air carried the faint scent of ashes from a nearby neighbor's fireplace, sweet and sharp. I knelt beside the flower bed, brushing away a fallen leaf. The earth beneath my fingers was damp, forgiving. "I tried," I whispered. "I did everything we promised." The letter rested against my palm, its edges fluttering in the breeze. I thought of all the things I'd lost: the piano, the ring, the illusion of belonging, and all the things I still had: breath, time, the quiet pulse of a heart that refused to close. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my purse, close to where I kept my keys and a small photo of our family back when laughter came easily. Looking toward the horizon, I could see the faint shimmer of the river beyond the rooftops. The day had begun again, indifferent and kind all at once. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the paper's soft outline against my skin. "If Laura forgets," I whispered, repeating his words, "then I'll remember for both of us." And for the first time since the wedding, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like room to grow. That night, the phone began to ring before the sun dipped below the horizon. I sat by the window, a wool shawl draped over my shoulders, the faint scent of rosewater still clinging to my skin. Outside, the last light bled into the river, gold fading into gray. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock and the distant echo of my daughter's voice through a memory. The first call flashed across the screen. Laura. I stared at her name until it vanished. Then came the second, and the third. Each one lit the room for a heartbeat, then slipped back into darkness. I placed the phone on the table, face down, and folded my hands in my lap. By the fifth call, I rose and lit a candle. Its small flame trembled in the glass, casting shadows that danced across the framed photograph of our family from years ago. Thomas with his arm around us. Laura no taller than my waist. All three of us smiling without knowing how fragile joy could be. The phone rang again. I didn't move. Some lessons needed silence. When the 10th call came, I stepped into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, the tap running steady, calm. I sipped slowly, listening to the muffled vibration against the table. It sounded like a heartbeat. Hers, mine, maybe both. By the 15th, I opened my notebook. On its first page, I wrote the date and a single line. Silence is a boundary. The words felt heavy, but not cruel. They were a truth I'd avoided too long, one that asked me to stop rescuing what didn't want to be saved. The calls kept coming. I didn't answer. Not out of spite, but out of something quieter. Resolve, maybe even love, the kind that lets go so the other person can learn to reach on their own. I turned off the overhead light and let the room settle into dusk. Outside, the first stars pierced the sky, faint but insistent. I sat by the window again, watching them appear one by one as the phone buzzed across the table. By the 27th call, the candle had burned low, the wax curling inward like a closing hand. The phone went silent at last, screen black, reflection faintly catching my face. I picked it up, not to answer, but to set it carefully in the drawer beside my husband's letters. Some voices you have to meet later, when both hearts are ready. The clock chimed once. I exhaled slowly, then closed my eyes, letting the quiet fill every space that disappointment once claimed. The air smelled faintly of wax and lavender. My chest lifted, unburdened, steady. In the silence, I could almost hear the soft hum of a piano, the memory of a melody long sold but never forgotten. It played gently somewhere deep inside me, reminding me that peace wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of understanding. The rain had come quietly that afternoon, brushing against the windows like someone too shy to ask for entry. I sat in the living room, a blanket around my shoulders, a pot of chamomile steeping nearby. The house smelled of lemon soap and something faintly sweet, calm after chaos. For 2 days, the phone had stayed silent, tucked in the drawer beside Thomas's letters. I hadn't checked the screen. Some wounds heal better without constant light. I was reading when a soft knock echoed through the front door. 3 gentle taps, uncertain but familiar. I stood, heart catching in my chest. Through the small window beside the door, I saw her, Lara, drenched from the rain, hair clinging to her cheeks, a bouquet of lilies drooping in her hands. For a moment, I thought of the church steps, of sunlight and vows, and how quickly one can turn to the other. When I opened the door, she hesitated, clutching the flowers like an apology. "Mom," she said softly. I didn't know where else to go. The words hung between us, fragile as glass. I stepped aside. "Come in before you catch cold." She entered quietly, glancing around as if the room might judge her. Her gaze landed on the empty corner where the piano once stood, the faint outline still visible on the floor. "You sold it," she whispered. "For something I thought would last longer," I replied, motioning toward the couch. "Sit, you're shivering." She lowered herself onto the cushion, the lilies resting across her lap. "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked. "I don't even know how to start." I poured her a cup of tea, the steam rising between us like a veil. "You can start by breathing," I said gently, "and by listening." She nodded, eyes downcast. "I messed everything up." "Yes," I said simply, "because truth doesn't need decoration. But mistakes don't end us unless we hide behind them." Her tears spilled fast, unguarded. Everyone saw the things I said. "Words can wound," I murmured, setting the teapot down, "but silence can heal if you let it." A sound came from the porch. Footsteps, firm but slow. The door creaked slightly as a voice called out, "Everything all right, Mrs. Murdoch?" I turned toward the familiar tone. Officer Tate, my neighbor, stood under the awning, rain glistening on his coat. "Evening," I said. "We're fine, thank you." He tipped his hat, eyes warm. "Good to hear. Storm's picking up. If you folks need anything, you know the number." "Appreciate it." When I closed the door, Lara looked up, startled. "Was that just Officer Tate?" I said. "He checks in when the weather's rough." I met her gaze. There are always people who help, if we reach for the right ones. She nodded slowly, clutching the teacup between her palms. The rain deepened outside, tapping softly against the windows. Inside, the air felt steadier, grounded. "I don't expect forgiveness tonight," she said at last, "but I need to try." "Trying is a start," I replied. "Forgiveness isn't a door you push through. It's one you knock on and wait." She looked down at the lilies, petals trembling in her hands. I watched her shoulders fall, the first crack in the wall she'd built around herself. The storm outside rumbled, but inside, the silence was kind. I lifted my own cup, let the warmth steady me, and said quietly, "We'll talk again, when you're ready to listen all the way." She nodded, eyes shining, and for the first time in years, I saw the girl who once reached for my hand without shame. The rain eased by morning, leaving the air cool and clean. The world washed back to quiet. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen curtains in thin gold lines, glinting off the teapot from last night. I moved slowly, placing 2 plates on the table, slices of toast, warm from the pan, the scent of cinnamon and butter softening the space between us. Lara sat across from me, eyes still puffy from crying, hair damp but brushed, hands clasped in her lap. The lilies she'd brought now rested in a vase on the windowsill, petals unfolding toward the light. Neither of us spoke at first. Silence felt fragile, like porcelain newly glued. I poured the tea, let the steam rise, and finally said, "You asked to fix things. That means there has to be a plan." She nodded, voice low. "I'll do whatever it takes." I studied her face, the same one I'd kissed goodnight for 20 years, now older, lined with choices. "Love isn't a rescue mission," I said softly. "If you want forgiveness, it has to be built, not begged." She swallowed hard. "How do I start?" "There are 3 conditions," I answered. "Not punishments, paths." Her shoulders straightened, ready. "First," I began, "you need help, real help. Therapy, counseling. Somewhere you can unpack the why behind the cruelty. Pride is just pain wearing perfume. It needs air, not applause." Lara's eyes dropped, but she nodded. "I can do that." "Second," I continued, "responsibility. You'll need to face the people you hurt, not with excuses, but with accountability. The Langleys, the staff at the wedding, the people who saw a version of you that wasn't true. You owe them honesty." A tremor crossed her lips. "That's a lot of people." "It's a lot of healing," I said, "but healing is heavy before it's light." She wiped her cheek, exhaling slowly. "What's the third?" "Start from 0, I said. "Not from pity, not from gifts. You have to rebuild a life that belongs to you, not one built on borrowed approval." Her fingers tightened together. "Does starting from 0 mean without you?" "It means without expecting me to carry you," I replied. "I'll walk beside you, but I won't walk for you." The words settled between us, steady and unflinching. She pressed her palms flat on the table, as if anchoring herself. "I don't want the easy way anymore," she whispered. "Good," I said, "because love that costs nothing learns nothing." A thin silence followed, not cold, but thoughtful. Outside, birds flickered through the wet branches, shaking droplets into sunlight. Lara reached for her cup, fingers trembling slightly. "I thought forgiveness would be instant," she admitted. "Nothing worth keeping ever is," I answered. "You don't rebuild trust with promises. You rebuild it with presence." She nodded, the first calm I'd seen in her eyes since the wedding. "I'll try, Mom." I looked at her, truly looked, and saw the faint outline of the little girl beneath the guilt. Trying is how we start. Consistency is how we continue. We ate quietly, toast cooling on our plates, steam curling from our tea. The morning felt less like an ending, more like an opening, one careful breath at a time. Before she left, she turned at the doorway. "I'll find a counselor today." "Good," I said. "And tomorrow, begin again." When the door closed behind her, the house stayed still, but not empty. The lilies caught a beam of light, petals glowing as though they believed her too. A week later, I drove toward the shoreline, the morning light soft and silvery, the sky opening like a calm breath. The road curved gently along the coast, and with every turn, the air grew saltier, freer. I rolled down the window, letting the breeze tangle my hair, carrying whispers of gulls and the faint hush of waves. Charleston had always been our favorite escape, mine and Thomas's. We used to walk this same stretch, his hand warm around mine, our daughter running ahead with seashells clutched to her chest. I hadn't been back since he passed, since she'd grown too busy to remember. But today felt different. I wasn't chasing what was lost. I was meeting what remained. I parked near a small overlook, slipping off my shoes as I stepped onto the sand. The tide stretched wide and patient, the sea the color of pewter beneath a low sun. I carried nothing with me but a small envelope, the letter he'd written, folded twice, edges worn from reading. Each step sank softly, the sand cool and damp beneath my feet. When the first wave brushed my ankles, I closed my eyes and listened. The rhythm was steady, ancient, like the heartbeat of something forgiving. I reached down and picked up a shell, smooth and pale, shaped like a tiny ear. Pressing it close, I could almost hear the echo of piano keys, the sound of home before silence. Thomas's words lingered in my mind. "Remember who you can still be." For years, I had lived as if motherhood were my only map, as if love meant shrinking to fit the spaces others allowed. But standing there, toes buried in sand and wind tangling through my hair, I realized I was more than the shadow of what I'd given away. I walked along the tide line, the water tracing crescents around my ankles. Seagulls circled above, their cries sharp and free. Nearby, a family laughed as a child chased a small kite, its red tail fluttering against the pale sky. The sight warmed me, not with envy, but with gentle understanding. Love didn't have to vanish when it changed shape. It could return as purpose. I found a smooth patch of sand and knelt, opening the envelope. The letter was soft now, the ink smudged slightly from salt and tears. I placed it gently on the ground and set the seashell beside it. "I've reminded her," I whispered to the wind. "Now I'm reminding me." For a long while, I stayed there, watching the horizon breathe in and out, the ocean folding and unfolding like forgiveness itself. My dress fluttered around me, burgundy against gray-blue waves, the same color I'd worn at the wedding, the color of hope, still standing. When I rose, I tucked the shell into my pocket. Its faint hum rested against my palm, steady, alive. I turned back toward the path that led to the car, the one that curved homeward, and whispered, "I'll live for myself now, and for others who've been left behind." The wind carried the words out to sea, scattering them like prayers. Behind me, the tide reached for the footprints I left, smoothing them into memory. Ahead, the road shimmered in sunlight, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back. The afternoon sun dipped low as I walked through the old part of town, streets lined with brick and whispers of another century. Charleston always carried a hum beneath its charm. Footsteps on cobblestones, the distant clang of a streetcar, the murmur of tourists with maps and cameras. But beyond the boutiques and shaded courtyards, the streets turned quieter, edges frayed by stories no guidebook would name. I carried a paper cup of coffee, warm against my palms. It was the kind of day that asked for stillness, for noticing. Somewhere behind me, A church bell rang 4 times. As I passed an alleyway, movement caught my eye. A woman sitting against a wall, wrapped in a faded coat, a stack of newspapers for a cushion. Her hair was streaked silver and gray, her face marked by years of weather, and in her lap rested a small photo frame, its glass cracked clean through the middle. I hesitated, then stepped closer. "Would you like some coffee?" She looked up, eyes pale and soft. "Haven't had one in days." I handed her the cup, and she took it carefully, as if afraid it might vanish. "Thank you, dear," she said, blowing gently across the rim. "You remind me of someone." I knelt beside her, the pavement cool through my skirt. "Who's that?" She nodded toward the photo, tracing her finger along the broken glass. Inside was the image of a young woman in a graduation gown, smile wide, arms around a man and a child. "My daughter," she whispered. "She said she'd come back for me once she made something of herself. That was 15 years ago." The words settled like dust between us. I didn't speak. Some stories ask only for witness. "She used to love music," the woman added, voice trembling. "Played piano on Sundays at the church. When her father passed, she stopped playing. Said every note sounded like goodbye." I felt my throat tighten. The hum of passing cars blurred, leaving only the sound of her breath and the faint slosh of coffee inside the cup. "Do you have anywhere to go?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "Places to sleep, not to stay." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small paper bag from the bakery, 2 rolls, still warm. "Here," I said. "It's not much, but it's fresh." Her eyes glistened. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said, "but I wanted to." She smiled, small and weary. "The world forgets people like us." "Only if we let it," I replied. As she ate, I looked at the cracked frame again, the fracture splitting the daughter's face in 2. Something stirred deep within me, a recognition not of circumstance, but of ache. We were both mothers learning how to exist beyond absence. When she finished, I asked her name. "Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor," I repeated, holding it gently, as if saying it out loud could tether her back to the world. Before leaving, I slipped a small card into her coat pocket. The number of a local shelter I knew, one that offered counseling and job placement. "They'll help," I said. "Tell them Christine sent you." She nodded, clutching the cup to her chest. "Thank you, Christine. Maybe it's not too late." As I walked away, the late sun spilled across the street, gilding the cracked glass of her photo. I thought of the letter from Thomas, of the seashell in my pocket, of all the mothers and daughters lost to pride, waiting for doors to open again. And right there, amid the cobblestones and fading light, an idea bloomed quietly. Something steady, something kind. A place where women like Eleanor, like me, could begin again. I turned toward the harbor, where the water caught the gold of the setting sun, and whispered to the wind, "Maybe it's time for a second chance." 2 days later, I met Walter at a small cafe by the river. The morning light shimmered across the glass windows, painting ripples on the table between us. The air smelled faintly of roasted beans and salt from the nearby harbor. I'd chosen a corner seat facing the water, my purse resting beside me, the seashell tucked safely inside. Walter arrived right on time, carrying that quiet steadiness he always wore, a presence that calmed rather than filled the room. He greeted the barista by name, thanked her for the refill, then took the seat across from me. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. I smiled faintly. Neither was I. He leaned back, studying me for a moment. "I wanted to see how you were holding up. That night," his voice softened. "No one should have to endure that, especially alone." I wasn't alone, I said, folding my hands around my cup. You stood up. He gave a small nod, eyes thoughtful. Felt like the least I could do. For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, the kind that carries respect. Outside, gulls wheeled over the docks, their cries bright against the low hum of the city. I heard you met someone, Walter said gently. A woman named Eleanor. I blinked, surprised. How did you— My wife mentioned it, he explained. Vivian saw you near Market Street. She said you stopped to help. She reminded me of someone, I said quietly, of what happens when kindness has nowhere to go. He nodded, fingers tracing the rim of his cup. You have a gift for seeing people, Christine, for listening. The world's short on that these days. I looked at him, unsure where he was leading. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been thinking, he said. After the wedding, after everything, I kept asking myself what good could come from it. I believe we're given pain not to keep it, but to build something from it. He reached into his jacket and placed a folder on the table. I'd like to help you start something new. I frowned, touching the edge of the folder. What is this? He opened it to reveal a single page, neatly typed. A proposal, a community center, second chance, a place for women who've been cast aside, who need shelter, guidance, and dignity. The words blurred for a moment as my eyes stung. Walter, I don't have the money for something like this. He smiled. I'm not asking for your money. I'm asking for your soul, your experience, your heart. The funding, the building, that's on me. I sat back, stunned. You'd do that? He nodded. I was raised by a woman who rebuilt her life from ashes. I see that same strength in you. It's time people like you lead the way. A soft voice came from behind me. And you'll need someone to make it legal. I turned. Helen Cole stood near the doorway, her gray hair pinned neatly, a briefcase in hand. Walter told me about the idea. I've drawn up the preliminary paperwork for 501c3 status. If you're ready, we can file within the week. I blinked, overwhelmed. This is happening fast. Helen smiled. Sometimes healing moves quickly once you stop fighting it. Vivian appeared a moment later, hesitating near the counter. Her gaze met mine, uncertain but softened. Walter's right, she said quietly. You deserve to build something better than what we showed you that night. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I reached into my purse and set the seashell on the table. If we're going to call it second chance, I said, then it has to sound like home. Walter smiled, eyes warm. Then let's begin. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, scattering light across the river. For the first time in a long while, I felt it, not as forgiveness, but as a promise. The morning of the grand opening dawned clear and bright, the sky a wide wash of pale blue over Charleston Harbor. I stood at the entrance of the new center, the sign above the door freshly painted, Second Chance Women's Center. The name shimmered softly in the sunlight, its letters curved with grace. Beneath it, the scent of fresh lilies and sea air mingled, carrying the promise of something mended. Inside, volunteers bustled quietly, arranging chairs, setting out trays of pastries, lighting candles on small tables. The walls, painted a gentle cream, caught the morning light and scattered it like warmth. Framed photographs of women laughing, working, rebuilding their lives lined the hallway. Stories waiting to be told. Walter approached with his usual calm, a folder tucked under his arm, his tie slightly askew. You ready? He asked. I nodded, smoothing the front of my blazer. As I'll ever be. Helen stood nearby, reviewing the final paperwork, her gold pen glinting as she signed the last page. The state's approval came through at sunrise, she said. It's official now. I exhaled slowly, the weight of the past weeks softening into something steady. Thank you, Helen. I couldn't have done this without you. You already did, she said kindly. You just needed the world to see it. Guests began to arrive. Neighbors, local officials, women from shelters and churches, faces both new and familiar. Nora waved from the doorway, a bouquet of sunflowers in her hands, her smile bright and full of pride. Vivian followed a few steps behind, hesitant but sincere, placing a check discreetly in the donation box. She caught my eye, nodded once, then took a seat in the back row. When the crowd settled, Walter stepped to the small podium near the ribbon. Thank you all for being here, he began. This building isn't just brick and paint. It's proof that grace can take shape, that the past doesn't have to be a prison. He turned toward me. But no structure stands without a cornerstone. Today, that cornerstone is Christine Murdoch, a woman who taught us that silence can hold strength and forgiveness can have boundaries. Applause filled the room, gentle but heartfelt. I stepped forward, my hands trembling only slightly, and accepted the scissors from Walter. Together, we cut the ribbon. The sound was soft, almost like a sigh. Inside, people moved freely through the rooms, exploring. In one corner, a counselor spoke quietly with a young mother. In another, a woman placed her hand on a new sewing machine, eyes bright with possibility. Laughter drifted through the air like the first notes of a song. Later, as the noise settled, I stepped to the podium. For a long time, I said, I thought chosen family meant being invited in. Today, I understand it's also about who we choose to stand beside. These women chose me too, and together we'll choose one another again and again. Nora wiped a tear. Walter smiled from the front row, hands folded. Helen closed her briefcase with quiet satisfaction. I looked around the room, the light, the faces, the pulse of purpose, and felt something inside me settle. The shell in my pocket hummed faintly, warm from my palm. When the last guests left and the doors closed behind them, I lingered near the window, watching the sun lift higher over the harbor. The world outside moved on, boats gliding across the water, gulls circling above, but inside, time felt new. Second Chance wasn't just a place. It was a promise kept. A soft drizzle fell that afternoon, mist curling off the harbor like breath on glass. The grand opening had ended hours ago, but I stayed behind, moving quietly through the halls, straightening chairs and folding programs. The scent of lilies still lingered, sweet and clean, mingling with fresh paint and new beginnings. In the corner of the lobby, a small plaque gleamed beneath the light. Founded with grace, built on gratitude. I traced the edge with my finger, letting the words sink in. Every inch of this place carried a story. A scar turned into shelter, a heartbreak turned into hope. The rain deepened, tapping gently against the tall windows. I was about to lock up when I heard a car door close outside. Tires crunched over wet gravel. Footsteps approached. Then came a knock, soft, hesitant, familiar. When I opened the door, Laura stood there beneath a pale umbrella, her hair tucked behind her ears, eyes bright but nervous. She wasn't dressed for apology this time. No heavy makeup, no jewelry, just jeans and a cream sweater, rain beating along the sleeves. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice catching. "I heard about the opening." I smiled faintly. "You should have come." She shook her head. "I wanted to, but I thought today belonged to you." Behind her, a delivery van idled. Two movers stepped out, lifting something long and wrapped in a protective cloth. My breath caught. "I brought you something," Laura said. "Something I took for granted. They carried the object inside, unwrapped it carefully, and there it was. The piano. My piano. The same deep cherry wood, faint scratch near the pedal, ivory keys gleaming softly under the light. I reached out, hand trembling, and touched the smooth surface. The faint scent of polish mixed with memory. Lara watched me, tears gathering. I found it at the consignment store. The owner remembered you, said you told him it held a lifetime. He let me buy it back. I ran my fingers across the keys, the familiar texture sparking a dozen echoes. Lullabies, lessons, evenings spent singing with Thomas. The bench creaked just the same. Lara's voice shook. You sold it so I could have a gift that day. I want you to have your voice again. I sat down slowly, pressing one key, middle C. The note rang clear, true, the sound filling the hall like forgiveness. My eyes burned, but I didn't look away. Do you remember what your father used to say? I asked softly. She nodded, smiling through tears. That a home with music is never empty. The words lingered, fragile and full. I shifted, letting my hands find their old place, one note after another. A slow melody rose, simple and familiar, the same lullaby I used to play when she couldn't sleep. Lara sank to her knees beside me, resting her head on my arm like she did as a child. The rain outside softened, matching the rhythm of the song. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The music said what words could not, that love might break, but it remembers the tune. When the last note faded, I closed the cover gently. Welcome home, I whispered, unsure whether I meant the piano or the girl beside me. She looked up, eyes shining. Maybe both. I smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. Maybe both, I echoed. In the stillness that followed, the world felt whole again. Not perfect, not repaired, but alive. The piano gleamed softly in the light, a reminder that what's given in love always finds its way back. The rain had cleared by morning, leaving the streets washed in silver light. Through the tall windows of the center, I could see the harbor stretching wide, calm and bright beneath the soft sun. The piano sat near the corner, its wood warm from daylight, a quiet witness to all that had been lost and found again. Lara arrived just after 10, holding 2 cups of coffee. She wore her hair pulled back, her expression open in a way I hadn't seen since she was a girl. I stopped by that bakery you love, she said, handing me a cup. Still makes the same cinnamon rolls. Some things don't change, I said, smiling. And some finally do. We sat across from each other at one of the small tables near the window, steam rising between us. For a while, we just listened, to the muffled hum of the street below, to the soft tick of the clock on the wall, to the simple rhythm of being present without pretending. I've been going to therapy, she said finally, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Every week. It's uncomfortable, but honest. I've had to look at things I didn't want to see. That's how healing starts, I said. You can't mend what you won't touch. She nodded slowly. I've also been volunteering. At the shelter near Market Street, there's a woman there named Eleanor. She said she knows you. I smiled. She does. She found her way here last week. We're helping her get housing. Lara's eyes softened. I think about her a lot. About you. About how kindness can be so quiet you forget it's there. She reminds us, I said. Pain makes noise. Healing whispers. Lara took a deep breath. Mom, I'm not here to ask for things anymore. I used to think love meant you'd catch me no matter how many times I fell. But I see now, falling isn't the lesson. Standing is. I watched her carefully. There was no desperation in her tone this time, only truth. Love isn't a rescue rope, I said. It's a hand extended, not a life exchanged. She reached across the table, resting her hand over mine. I don't want to be your burden anymore. I want to be your daughter, as a woman, not a child. Her words settled softly, full of weight and grace. I turned my hand to hold hers. Then meet me where I am, as two women learning each other again. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I know I hurt you. Yes, I said, but pain isn't the end. It's a doorway. What we walk through next, that's what matters. She smiled faintly. Then let's walk. We finished our coffee in companionable silence. When we stood, she glanced toward the piano. Play something, she said softly. I sat down, fingers resting on the keys, and began a slow melody, one I hadn't touched in years, gentle and unhurried. Lara stood beside me, hand on my shoulder, eyes closed, swaying slightly to the rhythm. The music filled the room like breath, like forgiveness shared rather than spoken. When the final note faded, she whispered, "Thank you for still being here." I looked up at her, the sunlight catching in her hair, and said quietly, "You're part of my story, Lara, but not my whole story." She nodded, "And you're part of mine." We stood together by the piano, the silence now full of peace. The city outside moved on, unaware, but in that small room, time paused long enough for two women to begin again. Equal, seen, enough. The sun rose soft and golden over the harbor, spilling through the tall windows of the center. Morning light caught on the brass letters of the plaque near the door, Second Chance Women's Center, and cast them across the walls like quiet blessings. I stood at the podium, fingers resting on its edge, the faint hum of conversation behind me. The grand hall was filled with faces, some new, some familiar, each carrying their own history. Women sat shoulder to shoulder, hands folded, eyes bright with beginnings. Along the back wall, volunteers arranged coffee and pastries. The smell of cinnamon and warmth drifted through the air. I spotted Nora in the second row, her sunflower pin catching the light. Walter and Helen sat nearby, speaking softly with a small group of donors. Even Vivian was there, posture gentle, her pearls exchanged for a simple gold chain. And beside the piano stood Lara, poised but humble, her hands resting lightly on the polished wood. I took a breath, feeling the weight and grace of the moment settle across my shoulders. "Good morning," I began. My voice carried easily, calm but sure. When I first stood before this building, it was empty, just walls and dust. But sometimes the things that look empty are simply waiting to be filled, with purpose, with hope, with second chances. A ripple of quiet moved through the crowd. I looked at the women in the front row, their eyes reflecting the same mix of fear and courage I'd once carried. "You are not broken," I continued. "You are in progress. Every scar you bear is a doorway to strength. Every silence you've endured is proof you've survived." I paused, glancing toward Lara. "And every relationship can be rewritten, not by forgetting what happened, but by remembering who we still can be." She smiled faintly, tears shimmering, and I felt my own throat tighten. "Second Chance isn't just a name," I said. "It's a promise that what we build from truth will last longer than what we built from appearances. That love, when it finally learns its own worth, will choose kindness over comfort." Applause rose softly, hands meeting not in noise, but in understanding. I let the sound wash through me like tidewater, steady and sure. When the room settled again, I placed my hand over my heart and spoke one last time, not as a plea, but as a truth carved from every step that led me here. It's never too late to be seen. It's never too late to start again. And it's never too late to see the truth. for ourselves, for our children, for the world. The piano stood gleaming in the corner. I walked toward it, nodding once to Lara. She lifted the lid and took the bench beside me. Together, we pressed the first notes, soft, simple, a melody stitched from memory and mercy. The audience fell silent. Light pooled across the keys, catching our hands as they moved. Each note floated upward, through the open windows, out into the bright morning air, where gulls soared and bells rang faintly from a nearby church. As the song faded, I looked out toward the horizon, where sky met sea, where endings bent into beginnings. Some battles are fought in silence, and silence, when it carries truth, is the loudest victory of all.